afternoon, everybody. My name is Adam Nee, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nantucket Book Foundation. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to thank our top donors, Richie Battle, Randy and Lisa Cohn, Ellen and Linwood Dame, Elizabeth Galvin, Mary and Robert Haft, Nancy Seaman and Alan Schwartz, Beth Wilkinson and David Gregory, and our top sponsors, the White Elephant and the Boston Globe. And if everybody could quickly take a minute to silence your cell phones, would be great. We are gathered here today because stories matter, and few storytellers working today bring the urgency, the depth, and the sheer narrative power of the writer we are about to hear from. John Vaillant is the acclaimed author of landmark works of narrative nonfiction, including The Tiger, a gripping account of a man-eating Amur tiger in the Russian Far East, and The Golden Spruce, which explored the collision of indigenous culture, ecological grief, and human obsession on the coast of British Columbia. Both books confirmed Vaillant as a master of what you might call wilderness nonfiction, writing that places the natural world at the center of the human story, where it has always belonged. His latest book, Fire Weather, On the Front Lines of a Burning World, may be his most important yet. It begins with one of the most dramatic and destructive wildfires in Canadian history and expands outward into a sweeping, urgent examination of what a hotter, drier, more fire-prone world means for all of us. It's at once a thriller, a work of climate journalism, and a profound meditation on the meditation on the choices that brought us here. Fire Weather has been praised by critics and scientists alike for making the abstract devastatingly concrete, turning data and dread into a book you simply cannot put down. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to John Vaillant.
Hey, everybody. My head is just swirling from the past 3 days, and the Methodist Church has a whole new meaning for me now. All those just amazing events. I took a lot of notes, and so very grateful for that, but especially to Wendy Hudson for scouting me down in San Miguel de Allende and getting me up here, and Chrissy Brown and Adam Nee, who actually made it happen, and Mary Haft, who's also really looked after us in some wonderful ways. I'm going to start with, I don't know if there are any writers in the audience. I know of one, and he gave me this really wonderful blurb at the top there that has really meant the world to me for the past 3 years, and I love that it travels around with the book now. So I'm really grateful for that. But there are other writers who might need a little more advice, and Grace Paley's advice is, first of all, to keep a low overhead, and I know that's an ironical thing to say on Nantucket, but it is a good thing to be your own benefactor when you're starting out. Second, to make sure your lovers have some regard for your work. And I got really lucky in that department. She's right over there, and my first reader and filter, and full of good counsel. But the third one is to tell the truth all the time. And that one really proved impossible. So I've lowered my sights a bit to don't lie. Not to your readers, and especially not to yourself. But the trouble is, we don't always know when we're lying or deluding ourselves. And this is where Jared Diamond comes in handy in his 2004 book, Collapse, a topic that's never in our lifetimes been more relevant. He counsels readers to re-examine your core beliefs. But re-examining one's core beliefs is harder than it looks, and it's why this talk isn't going to be as funny as we might wish a talk in a place called the Dreamland to be. Anyhow, once upon a time, way back in 2015, when I was still deluding myself, something happened that forced me to re-examine my core beliefs. Early one summer morning that year, while camping on a small island off the coast of British Columbia, I awakened to an orange glow. Our tent was orange, so at first I thought it was sunlight shining through the fabric. But when I crawled out, I could see that the trees, the nearby islands, the air as far as I could see was suffused with orange light and redolent with smoke. To the east, above a nearby island, was the rising sun, a pale and faceless coin, so unlike the sun it led a neighbor to wonder aloud if it was the moon we were looking at. An older woman camping nearby said it reminded her of the sky during the London Blitz. Before us, the sea lay nearly motionless beneath an oily calm. Sound did not carry in the normal way, nor did light refract. No birds sang. This place, where my family and I have camped for 20 years, a place of peace and profound beauty, had been transformed while we slept. A firelit pall had settled over the island, the coast, and with it an awful waiting stillness. We soon learned that miles away, all around us, wildfires were burning in the rainforest. Should the island ignite, there was nowhere to go but into the sea. I took stock of my wife and children, of our situation, and I wondered to myself, perhaps this is how it ends. Nothing I have seen since has made this possibility seem any less likely. And yet until that morning, I had been comfortable in my delusion that such fires were a Southern problem, a California problem, an Australia problem. This painful re-examine of my core beliefs probably primed me for fire weather, but I didn't know it then. 10 months later, in the May of 2016, I was ensconced in a Roman signal tower in Tuscany, working on a novel, when I made the mistake of looking at Twitter. And there I saw a fire burning where a city should have been. And Fort McMurray, if you've never heard of it, is about 1,000 miles north of here and a couple thousand miles west. It's due north of Montana. You see it up there on the right. That is where about 4.5 million barrels of petroleum products are melted and piped into the United States. That by itself is the largest source of foreign imports into the United States. And what you see in orange are the oil sands, also known as the tar sands, and it's basically a giant sand dune, not so different from Nantucket, but soaked in tar. And on May 3rd, a fire swept into it, triggering the largest, most rapid evacuation due to fire in modern times. In hindsight, it's clear that Fort McMurray was a bellwether fire that prefigured LA, Lahaina, Paradise, Tubbs, Jasper, Alberta, and so many others. But back then, it still looked like an aberration. Just a decade ago, most of the terrible fires we now know by name hadn't happened yet. But climate scientists warned us they would, and after Fort McMurray burned, I believed them. Fire Weather took me 7 years to write. It was my hardest, longest book. I spent days, probably months at my desk, actively not writing, and I nearly bailed in earnest several times. But during that time, I came to understand that fire is an appetite and a hunter. And now it's hunting us. If we have a superpower, besides our brains and thumbs and speech, it is fire. Virtually everything we've accomplished on our increasingly rapid journey of differentiation from other apes and from our own ancestors can be traced in direct relation to our ability to focus and concentrate this fierce prosthetic energy. There is no other natural force or element over which we have such a compelling illusion of control. Fire is the only natural disaster that can be initiated by a gesture as casual as dropping a match. And this complicates our relationship to it in some profound ways. The degree to which we have mastered fire borders on the magical. And in this way, we have all become casual wizards. Most of us never even see the flames we've conjured up. The car just drives. The ferry just goes. The shower just gets hot. The stove burner is not on fire, but a blue flower blooming day and night, all year round. So simple and safe, and above all contained, even a child can use it. But fire has other plans. It is fire's nature to strive upward, In other words, to aspire, which means literally to breathe desire into, and also to rise. Fire, it can be said, is aspiration in its purest form. Desire burning, and burning desire to exist, to consume, to grow, to flourish, all as fervently as we do. Since the dawn of the petroleum age just a century and a half ago, we have given fire exponentially more opportunities to engage in all those behaviors we seem to emulate and excel at. But like Ariel to our Prospero, fire is a begrudging servant, selfish and willful. It yearns above all for freedom, which it will take at any opportunity and at any cost. And it has enabled the same impulses in us. Fire is a messenger, a kind of combustive lorax, but it is also a mirror. If we observe how its behavior is changing, we can see in it a reflection of how we are changing. Bigger, faster, hungrier, more willing to violate established norms. Never in Earth's history or in ours have so many fires been ignited in so many places on such a continuous basis. I counted them, and that's what took 7 years. If you include every engine combustion, humans generate trillions of fires every day, galaxies worth. If one were able to see them all, one might reasonably infer that human civilization is functionally a fire cult. In terms of emissions, the cumulative effect of all those fires is comparable to a supervolcano that never stops erupting. There's a place I want to introduce you to because half of Americans live in it, and we're in it right now. This is the WUI, the wildland-urban interface. It's where the built environment butts up against wild land. It's where a lot of fires come from. This is the view from Fire Hall 5 in Fort McMurray, a bit south of town. This is 6 p.m. on May 2nd, 2016. And there are 5 fires burning around the city on that day, but this is the one that's got people worried. It's still a couple of miles out of town, but you see those black coils. That indicates an enormous amount of energy. They identified it very quickly. They had Bambi buckets and hot shots on it within half an hour. They could not suppress it. And when it's burning black like that, you know it's either into black spruce or houses. In this case, it's still out in the forest, but the weather conditions following an El Nino were drought, for one thing, and the temperature record on these coming days would be broken by 6 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the relative humidity was comparable to Death Valley in the month of July, about 12%. And again, we are 1,000 miles north of here in the subarctic. In Fort McMurray, May 3rd began differently for everyone, but it ended the same. For Chandra Linder, it began with the rite of spring. Linder was a labor relations advisor who worked for Syncrude, one of the oil sands companies up there. Linder's husband, Corey, an engineer, was employed there too, and so were many of their friends. Blonde with a pixie cut, Linder is fit and warm and does not suffer fools. It makes sense once you get to know her, but to an outsider, it might be surprising to see someone so polished and female in such a remote, industry-oriented, testosterone-heavy place. So up at these work sites, these massive refineries and mines, the gender ratio is about 25 to 1. It's a very weird place to work as a woman kind of overdetermined, not unlike being a woman working in a men's prison. The camps up there are basically like gulags. A really excellent book about that is Ducks by Kate Beaton, a graphic memoir that describes what it's like to work up there. Really a wonderful piece of work. So for work, Linder dresses accordingly. Minimal makeup, high collars, dark pants, no heels. Clothes suitable for climbing in and out of trucks and SUVs, for working in a world of working men. Linder had already seen the smoke plume southwest of town because everyone had seen it. A windswept cauliflower of billowing grays and browns that appeared to have erupted full-blown from the forest. It had been growing since Sunday, but it was still miles away, and it wasn't the only one. Over the weekend, the Linders had hosted friends evacuated due to another fire. It was almost a lark. They took photos with a big plume developing across the river the same way one would a sunset or a rainbow. Their friends went home the next day because forestry was on it. Boots were on the ground. Water bombers were in the air. As far as the Linders were concerned, whatever was out there was being handled because that's what people do in Fort McMurray. They handle things. Certainly the beginning of May was a little early for fires. There were still car-sized blocks of winter ice on the Athabasca River, and some local lakes had yet to thaw. But otherwise, this was nothing new. Fires cloud the horizon every spring and summer up here. As Chandra and Corey Linder said, practically in unison, it happens every year. I always get thirsty reading this section. Given the unseasonable heat and the fact that 5 separate wildfires had ignited around the city that weekend, it's hard to overstate how unconcerned was Fort McMurray's citizenry. But if you were up at dawn on May 3rd, as Chandra Linder was, and you had seen the sky so full of summer promise as she had, you might understand why. The brilliance of that morning was so exceptional that after her morning shower, Linder did something she hadn't done in a long time. She pulled out her favorite navy blue suit with the skirt, picked some medium heels to go with it, and left her socks in the drawer. Thus, attired, she headed off to work in Syncrude's head office. In her garage, there were a few vehicles to choose from, and in keeping with her outfit and her mood, Linder picked the car she calls the little one, a black Porsche that hadn't seen daylight in 6 months. In 2016, there was a national census done in Canada, and the median household income in Fort McMurray, this is 2 years after a global downturn in oil prices in 2014. In 2016, the median household income was still $200,000 a year. Winters are long and dark in Fort McMurray, but this one was over. Spring was here, and Linder felt as beautiful and as hopeful as the day. So we're going to jump ahead 3 or 4 hours on May 3rd. Still feeling the symptoms of spring fever, Chandra Linder knocked off work at lunch and organized herself for a 2 o'clock meeting at Syncrude's downtown office in the Borealis building. With no traffic, it's a 30-minute drive down the highway. Still 15 miles north of downtown, she was rounding a long, gradual bend in the river when her windshield filled with something she did not recognize. When I got that first view of it, said Linder, I went, hang on a second. It was clear overhead, but to the south, it was black. Black smoke with streaks of red in it. It took up the whole sky. I'm trying to make sense of this thing. I'm thinking, well, maybe it just looks closer than it is. I'm thinking, maybe the red is the sun shining through the smoke. But it's not the sun. It's in the wrong place. And then I realize it's flame. Linder had seen a lot of fire plumes, but this didn't look like any of them. So I pull over to the side of the highway and I call my guy Byron and I say, are we having this meeting? And he's like, no, we are not having this meeting. Don't come in. And I'm like, I'm looking at a wall of flames here. It was a short call, in part because no one was quite sure what to say next. What do you say on a beautiful spring day when the city where you live and conduct business appears to be on fire? After hanging up, Linder continued on to her exit, where she turned west, back up the hill and out of the river valley. Okay, she said, not right, but here's what I do. Well, I'm going to go home anyway, so I drive past the dry cleaners. Well, I'm going to drop off my stuff at Sam's place because in my mind, the fire's still on the other side of the river, downtown. So I'm dropping my stuff off and this guy comes in from the golf course in full golf apparel and he's like, holy shit, we just got evacuated from the golf course. And I'm like, well, what are you doing here? And he says, well, I'm here to pick up my dry cleaning. And I said, well, what golf course were you on? Because we have 2 in town. And he says, Thickwood, meaning the fire has just jumped the river. The Athabasca River by the Thickwood Golf Course is 1/3 of a mile wide. So, continued Linder, Sam the dry cleaner, who's our buddy, is on the phone to his wife. Honey, it just jumped the river. Get out, get out, get out. In all this craziness, Sam still takes my dry cleaning, logs it, and he's like, Tuesday good? And I'm like, yeah, next Tuesday is great. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on May 3rd, Linder tucked her laundry ticket safely in her wallet and aimed the Porsche for home. Chandra gets home with her laundry ticket around 2:10, 2:15, and this was the neighborhood south of her at 2:45. So this photograph, you could see it taken over the hood of this pickup truck in the foreground. Paul Ayerst took that photo. He was the last civilian out of his neighborhood called Beacon Hill, interestingly. They're not moving there because they're completely backed up down to the highway. And the highway is completely backed up because thousands of cars are already on it trying to get out of this city that's now just exploding into flame. And so he's sitting there watching fireballs roll over his wife and daughter's cars. And there's nothing he can do. And I asked him if he noticed the temperature on his dashboard thermometer, and he said, I did. It was 151 degrees. And he's sitting there, and there's nobody behind him, but he hears this, or feels this thud against the truck, and he thinks he's been hit, and he has, by a deer on fire. So it is a miracle that everybody in this photo is still alive. And if this was Portugal or California or Greece or Spain or Lahaina, they wouldn't be. So sadly, we are used to these photos now. But in 2016, this was very unusual. You know, there were a few fires in California prior to that produced these results, but this was really a rarity and shocking for Canadians to see, but really shocking for everybody, that kind of total destruction. I've thought a lot about Chandra at the dry cleaners because I'm haunted by the question, how and why do we cling to our status quo in the face of the shrieking dissonance all around us? Chandra's behavior, her spontaneous edits and revisions to the evolving story of her day are in microcosm what we're all doing. Right now, the Amazon could be burning. There is a cage match on the White House lawn. But Nantucket is really beautiful this time of year. Some of our favorite authors are here. And for the record, I'm having a lovely time, and I'm really grateful my dear wife of 30 years this month gets to join me. But as I flip through the sale rack at Murray's Toggery, I'm also asking myself, are we callous? Are we crazy? No more so than Chandra Linder was for trying to do her errands while her city burned. We tell ourselves and each other stories all the time, not just to enlighten and entertain, but to maintain focus, fulfill our obligations, and get through our days. A story I'm telling is that it's precisely these abilities to confabulate and to edit and revise on the fly that got us out of Africa to the farthest corners of the globe collaboratively without being paralyzed by grief and terror. When I was 19, I was introduced to Leslie Marmon Silko's wonderful novel, Ceremony, by the amazing English prof, Larry Buell. Maybe some of you had him. And lines from that book have been resonating in my head ever since. I'll tell you something about stories. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. I'm convinced that we learned to narrate and chapter our way through fear and chaos because it was adaptive, because our physical and psychic survival depended on it. In a sense, it is these core survival skills, hard-won and honed over dozens of millennia, that we have been celebrating here at this festival. And that said, I think we've reached a point where our capacity for compelling narrative, now amplified and distorted by our ability to exploit fossil fuels, has produced a maladaptive result. The story of petrocapitalism promised a world without limits, and it's not true. Some early map makers described unknown parts of the globe as terra incognita. Our planet and our civilization are now entering clima incognita, the unknown climate. In so doing, we are departing the Holocene epoch, the Goldilocks zone of relative climate stability that enabled us to build the world as we know it over the past 12,000 years. What I'm about to say is an answer to the question from a previous session. This is what the market fails to factor in when considering climate change. The physicist Albert Allen Bartlett said, "The greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function." Park Williams, a geography and climate change expert at UCLA, put it more simply. Each degree of warming causes way more fire than the previous degree of warming did. Here's what that looks like. That's an F-150 in Fort McMurray that melted. That's a bicycle in Los Angeles. And this is a term I'd like to introduce to you. Alex Steffen is a really potent futurist working out of Berkeley, California. I urge you to look at his work. He coined this term, discontinuity, an event or situation wherein past experience ceases to be a useful guide to future problem solving. Firefighters have been experiencing discontinuity more and more often over the past decade or two, and LA was one more example. How are you supposed to fight fires that are effectively unfightable? And how are we supposed to pay for them? The tab for LA is estimated in the hundreds of billions. The same goes for Hurricane Helene, and that's history now. It's an extraordinary moment we find ourselves in. Never before have technology, culture, and nature been moving so quickly simultaneously. And one reason I think we have a hard time wrapping our heads around this is because we're used to being the stars of the show. Historically, it's been humans who've outpaced the natural world. From arrowheads to AI, our species has progressed steadily faster than geologic time. But now geologic time, climate time, glacier time, sea level time, is moving as fast, in some cases faster than we are, faster than technology, faster than history. The world we thought we knew is changing under our feet because we're changing it. As you probably gathered, I'm trying to impress upon you the ferocious energy our fossil fuel-powered economy has loosed upon our planet. Even as it enables the fabulous lifestyle we are still trying to enjoy, it is now taking those gains away, endangering all the beings, forests, mountains, animals, and humans alike who enjoy fire-prone, hydrocarbon-rich areas like this one. Maybe you've heard people say, yeah, but we've always had bad fires. And that's true, but not this often or this bad. This is the past 100 years of California megafires. They really didn't happen all that often in the 20th century. This goes back to 1930. You'd have one every decade or two. It's a fire-prone landscape. It's normal. Then look at 2000. Look at the frequency and look at the size. A megafire used to be 100,000 acres. Now they're over 1 million. For the sake of perspective, the LA fire that destroyed 16,000 structures and killed 31 people doesn't even rank. It's not even on there. Like Russia, North Korea, Florida, Texas, and the province of Alberta, the US government now refuses to acknowledge the grave risk posed by fossil fuel emissions, principally CO2 and methane. And it's actively reversing and undermining efforts to decarbonize our energy and transportation sectors, thereby consigning all of us to an even hotter, more flammable world. In so doing, Washington is handing the future of energy, which is renewables, to China, who is installing more than 1 gigawatt of wind and solar every day. 1 gigawatt of electricity will power roughly 750,000 homes. As big oil supercharges its own bottom line and some of our portfolios with record profits, it's also supercharging our atmosphere with record quantities of greenhouse gas. CO2 levels are now fully 50% higher than they were in pre-industrial times. Increase anything by half, and you're going to notice. This is the Keeling curve created by Charles Keeling, who came out of Caltech in the 50s with a spectrometer that enabled him to measure parts per million of CO2. And he found his baseline in the late 50s, didn't really know what it meant or signified, but then he noticed it was going up. And he worked with Charles Revelle at the Scripps Institution. Roger Revelle was on Capitol Hill in the mid-50s talking about climate change, 30 years before Hansen went there. So one way to understand capitalism as it's currently practiced is as a global Ponzi scheme powered by fossil fuels and leveraged against the future of the living world. In light of this, the most accurate way to calculate the debt incurred by our current system of fossil fuel-powered, which is to say fire-powered civilization, is by measuring CO2. And if we understand excess CO2 as debt, then excess heat is the interest on that debt. So this is the past 175 years of global climate averages. As we see, the 19th century was a relatively cool period. That is normal in Earth's history. There is fluctuation. It warms and cools by 0.10, 0.2, 0.1, 0.2 Celsius. And then we see it kind of lurching up and down. That's totally normal. And then we see something happen in the late 70s where it just starts to climb. It settles back very briefly, and then it really starts to march. And look at 2023. It really takes a jump. Starting around 2000, global temperatures began rising steadily and noticeably. What this tells us is that our CO2 debt level has become unsustainable and the interest unpayable, to the point that we now find ourselves in the default zone. And I know no one here has ever done this, but typically when we default on a loan, the bank calls in our debt. They might even repossess your stuff. And this is one way to understand the steady increase in fossil fuel-enhanced weather disasters. These floods, fires, heat waves, and intensifying storms are the bank of nature's repo men coming to collect on that debt, repossessing, if you will, our homes, our cars, our cities, even our very lives. These are billion-dollar disasters over the past 40 years in the US. Take a look at our national debt over the past 40 years. These are the fundamentals our economy is built on. That would be a caution to me as an investor. The petroleum and banking industries are in first-degree denial about this, but some in the insurance industry are paying very close attention. I'm sure you're aware that the insurance business has entered a period of crisis in which wide swaths of the United States are becoming uninsurable. In the past 5 years alone, more than 50 insurance companies have withdrawn coverage from Florida and Louisiana alone. As you can imagine, LA residents are having a tough time with that too. Capitalism has a hard time functioning without protections of this kind. So does our society. Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse summed it up well recently when he said, "This isn't complicated. Climate risk makes things uninsurable. No insurance makes things unmortgageable. No mortgages crashes the property markets. Crashed property markets trash the economy. Jason Hickel, the author of this provocative book, wrote, "The climate crisis reveals that our civilization has never really been organized around science, contrary to the usual Enlightenment narrative. It is organized around capital. Science is embraced when it serves the interests of capital and is often ignored when it does not." And that's the world we're living in now. I wrote Fireweather not to bash capitalism or the petroleum industry, but to demonstrate objectively how and why catastrophic urban fire is now possible in just about any city or town. In 2024, a journalist with the Cape Cod Times called to ask me if the Cape could burn like Fort McMurray. Rather than answering directly, I'll say that I grew up summering on Martha's Vineyard, and it was a very stable place. We were in West Chop, where nothing really changes from one century to the next. You know those 2 points at the top of Martha's Vineyard Island? West Chop's on the left. It's a private, subtle place that doesn't advertise. You're in or you're out. There are no zip code throw pillows. I was just there, coincidentally, 3 weeks ago for the first time in 40 years. It's my first time here, too, in about 40 years. I was there on West Chop, scattering my mother's ashes. We spread them from a dock that I swam off of as a child, that my mother swam off of, and that her mother, who wrote those lines of poetry, swam off of. It was almost exactly as I remembered it: the light, the air, the lilacs, the startling sweetness of the salt water. Here's a summer picture from 1962. That sleeping baby on the left is me. The old woman holding us is my great-aunt Cocky, the Dowager Empress of West Chop, who was born the same year as the Battle of the Little Bighorn. In her beach house, high on a bluff overlooking Vineyard Sound, she would receive us, smoking through a cigarette holder while lounging on a Victorian fainting couch. To my 10-year-old self, shaking her 19th century hand, she seemed impossibly, terrifyingly old. All this to say that I am acutely tuned to stability and continuity, and also to the sensation of no longer having them. A couple of summers ago, 12 inches of rain fell in Litchfield County, Connecticut over one weekend. Hundreds of fires were burning across the Northeast in November of 2024. Firefighters were killed fighting them. It's a lot hotter on these islands than I remember. These are all unprecedented phenomena for this region, a place my family has inhabited since 1620. There's a more forward and positive looking way, there's a more positive and forward-looking way to interpret this moment, and that is as a stern invitation to mature out of petroleum-powered, AI-enhanced capitalism's dangerous delusion that A, nature is some kind of bottomless trust fund that we can draw on at will with no consequences, and B, that we are somehow in charge. And I don't care what business you're in, virtual or actual, nature owns 51% of it, at least. Until we recognize the natural world as more than a full partner in everything we do, she will continue to remind us of this fact in progressively more violent ways, and she will continue collecting on that debt. So let's be clear. Coal is an 18th century fuel. Oil, which drives the majority of the world's economic activity, is a 19th century fuel. The internal combustion engine was prototyped in 1860. Standard Oil, Exxon, was founded in 1870. Bitumen, what they're mining and melting in Alberta, is not a fuel at all. It is a driveway sealer. It takes billions of cubic feet of natural gas, which is methane, every day to melt and fractionate bitumen into substances Americans are willing to buy. Why on earth are we still doing this? Especially when scientists have understood the basics of the greenhouse effect literally since the 18th century. Eunice Foote, a citizen scientist from upstate New York, demonstrated the heat-retaining qualities of CO2 in 1856. Scientists were speculating on industrial CO2's potential for altering the climate in the 1890s. Evidence that this was happening was visible by the 1930s. The principal reason we labor and lobby so hard to liberate coal, oil, and gas from the ground is so we can burn it. In other words, if you're in the fossil fuel industry, you're in the fire industry, which means you're in the CO2 industry. What's alarming and probably indictable is the fact that petroleum companies have known this for 70 years. In fact, they were leaders in climate science, but their findings presented a quandary. How do you separate oil from fire or burning from emissions? You can't. And so, starting in the 1980s, the industry, along with its allies in government, in churches, in finance, and in the media, embarked on a disinformation campaign to disavow and undermine their own science. And they've been doing it ever since. And even the Wall Street Journal, historically friendly to big business and big oil, called them out. In 2023, they published an expose entitled "Inside Exxon's Strategy to Downplay Climate Change." Well, this is the strategy. This is Alex Steffen again. Predatory delay. The deliberate slowing of change to prolong a profitable but unsustainable status quo whose costs will be paid by others. That is official policy in the United States right now. And James Baldwin would recognize it in a second. And it begs a question every one of us should be asking our elected officials, our brokers, and ourselves. How is it not a crime to willingly, knowingly, enthusiastically sabotage the future? On Friday, Nicholas Boggs invoked James Baldwin's question regarding the endless foot-dragging on social justice. He said, "How long do you want for your progress?" Well, this applies to climate justice too, but I'm going to put a finer point on it. How long do we even have? So you've never seen this before because it's never happened before. This is Redding, California in 2018. This was a wildfire started by a dragging wheel rim on a flat tire, a camper van, and it metastasized into a tornado made of fire. This is not a tornado area. This is not Oklahoma. It's Northern California. But on this day, 3 days after those first sparks were thrown, it metastasized into an EF3 tornado. EF3 has 165 mile an hour plus winds. What was different about this tornado is it had internal gas temperatures of 2,700 degrees. That'll melt steel. So I walked this ground right after the fire, and there was no glass. And there were no houses. There were bare concrete slabs and nothing else except this kind of thing. In the back there, that is a steel high-tension wire pylon 100 feet tall. It carried this cable, which is 2 or 3 inches in diameter. You cannot lift it. Tons and tons of cable holding these massive towers down. This tornado tore 2 of those towers out of the ground and threw them into the forest. Hundreds of yards away, I found things like this. This was all that was left of the houses. That's a tractor seat. So I think this is why my hair turned gray. I'm not kidding. It shook me to see that. I think most of us here have a clear idea of what wealth is, but I'd like to offer an alternative definition. Wealth is not having to pack a go bag or run for your life. It's not having to explain to your kids why they had to or why they might have to in the future. Wealth is not hearing your friends or your children tell you that the reason they're not having kids is because they have no confidence in the current leadership to maintain a safe and stable climate. To be clear, we are not going to buy, bomb, bunker, drill, AI, SpaceX, or Mad Max our way out of this. We're going to have to reimagine our way out, reevaluate our way out, transition our way out, reduce our way out, and love our way out. Using the bullhorns of destructive weather and hemisphere-spanning heat and wildfire smoke, nature bellows our interconnectedness and roars our interdependence. No matter how big our bank accounts and reservoirs are, no matter how remote our islands, we cannot protect the places we love, the places that protect us, if we don't protect the ecosystem they depend on, which means, first and foremost, cooling it down. In other words, decarbonizing. We have the templates. Right now, it is technically possible to have stability and abundance. Solar is the cheapest energy ever invented. Paired with battery storage, its potential is effectively infinite. The potential of wind and geothermal is equally limitless and has barely been tapped. Friends and fellow islanders, the writing is on the wall and in these woods and waters, and it takes the form of a question. Are we going to go down clinging to a 20th century status quo in servitude to fire? Or are we going to evolve using our collective brilliance, our capacity for collective action, the abundant gifts for invention, connection, and influence in this room to lower the temperature, to recognize actively what makes life worth living, indeed what makes life possible at all? To this end, I want to leave you with a really potent word. And that word is reverescence. It means to revitalize, regenerate, regrow. This is what the earth wants to do. Growing, flourishing is the earth's default mode. After the fire passes over, this is what's waiting underground. This is another neighborhood in Fort McMurray, about 6 weeks after the fire. Those tender bulbs, planted by human hands, ended up being the most durable part of that neighborhood, the only things that survived. And I took a teaching from that, which was also the teaching of my grandmother's poem, which was also the teaching of the events I attended at this beautiful festival. And that teaching was, do your worst to me, and I will still return in beauty. So who's stopping us? Thank you. Thanks a lot.